In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ghost to Ghost. Tonight, we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, the Gatling Gun Club. Tonight, my co-hosts are Jennifer Verne, Research Manager and Podcast Director for Ghost to Ghost.
Good evening.
And Heather Lawson, Case Manager and Podcast Director for Ghost to Ghost.
Hello.
So, we're going to start this off, and I'll tell you, for those that don't know, the building is not there any longer. This has been torn down, unfortunately. And it was located on Illinois Street. It's set kind of catty-cornered behind the Scottish Rite Cathedral on Meridian. Very, very famous location. So we're going to start out first with the history, and I'm going to let Jennifer handle that.
Yeah, so again, today is a little different because I'm going to talk about the history, and then you're going to tell me why we're discussing it on a paranormal podcast.
There we go.
This is new to me. I know you've talked about this location before,
Yes.
but I had never heard about it. So I'm like, Gatling gun. I know what a Gatling gun is. It's that gun from the Civil War, right?
Exactly.
So I started my search, Googled Gatling gun. It was invented in 1861, the beginning of the Civil War. It's operated by a hand crank mechanism with 6 barrels revolving around a central shaft, although some have as many as 10 barrels around it. Each barrel fires once per revolution at about the same position. The barrels, a carrier, and a lock cylinder are separated, and they're all mounted on a solid plate revolving around the central shaft, like I said. So it looks like you got 6 rifle barrels, and
That's
they're
right.
all like glued together, clustered together.
Essentially, yes.
And it's mounted like a cannon on a cart with wheels. So then
So
the
it's
wheels
very
can be-
mobile.
yeah, very
Because
mobile.
it's very heavy.
Well, it looks like it would be, yeah. So I think of this gun as Civil War. Now, anybody who has seen Wild Wild West,
Oh, yes,
you know,
yes.
I'm sorry, I love
Well,
that
the
movie.
new,
I
the
think that
new
movie is great.
Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, so that was,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
wow.
you think Civil War, you think the Gatling gun. However, it saw very little action during the Civil War. I mean, it was invented in 1961, put into production the year after the war ended in 64.
I think mostly they used it on rail cars. They didn't use it a lot in the field, even though it was mounted to wheels.
Right, and that's what it was supposed to be invented for.
Yes.
But the design for it was based on a seed planter.
Mm-hmm.
And Richard Jordan Gatlin is the inventor. And he was born in North Carolina in 1818. He started inventing when he was only 21.
Mm-hmm.
He created the screw propeller for steamboats, but he missed the patent by 2 months.
Wow.
John Erickson had actually already held the
Wow.
patent for 2 months when he was. So Gatlin was like, well, darn it, let's keep going. So when he was 36, he moved to St. Louis, and there he invented a rice sewing machine and a wheat drill, which is the seed planter design for the
Yes.
Gatling gun. In 1840s, sometime, there was a smallpox attack, and he became interested in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So he went to the Ohio Medical College, and in 1850 graduated with his medical degree. But he never practiced medicine. He just thought it
Oddly
was fun to
enough,
get a degree, you know? Why not? During this time in the 1850s, he moved to Indianapolis. And that's where he married the daughter of a local physician, and he became brother-in-law to David Wallace, the governor of Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
And he became an active member of the Masonic Lodge, the Central Lodge number 23.
Yep. That's out there to all you guys at Center 23 that are listening.
There you go. Mr. Gatlin is one of yours. In 1862, he founded the Gatling Gun Company in Indianapolis, and the manufacturing of the gun began that year, 1862. Of note.
Let me interject real quick. Just for the record, this is the first machine gun, the very first machine gun ever made. Because, we had repeater rifles, but we didn't have anything like this.
No. And the reason he did this was his interest in medicine. He saw that more guys were dying from the infections rather than the actual wounds. So he thought...
Or the surgeon.
Right.
In some cases.
Or the surgeon.
Yeah. In Civil War, it's true.
The infections, right? Yeah. So he thought if he could create a repeating rifle...
Yes.
Then you had less manpower on the field, less chance of being hit, less casualties.
Exactly.
So that was his thought process behind inventing the gun. So after that was founded, he ended up moving away from Indianapolis and back to St. Louis, where he formed a new company building tractors and steam plows for the Plain States.
Oh.
However, his death, he was brought back to Indiana, and he's actually buried at Crown Hill Cemetery.
Yes, I've seen. I've actually been there and seen the memorial monument.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
So, that's where the Gatling Gun Club comes, right?
Nope.
No. Nope. I was like, okay, that's his house, or that was the manufacturing headquarters, or... Nope, not it. So, the Gatling Gun Club is neither the home of Mr. Gatlin, nor is it the headquarters of the company. It was actually a Civil War-era home in the 700 block of North Illinois Street. It was first known as the Toussey Nickel House, and it was built sometime around the 1850s to 1860s. It's an Italianate-style home, similar to what the Hanna House is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So this house does not look, before it was torn down, does not look the way it was originally, because there were add-ons and additions made.
Yes.
So this was actually basically just an 1860s duplex, two homes put together, in the style of the Hanna House. Very square, very boxy,
Kind of a plantation style almost, with the columns.
No, the columns were not original to the house.
They weren't, were they? Okay.
Nope, it was straight fronted, just like the Hanna House before that porch was put on in the 1800s.
Yes.
So, no porch, no nothing. The earliest occupants were the children of George Toussey. He was the earliest president of the Indiana National Bank. His son, Woodford Toussey, and his wife Eudora lived on the north side of the home, and his daughter Frances and her husband James Nickel lived in the south half. Now, Woodford went by the name Wood, and he was 26 when he moved into the house with his family. He was a captain in the Civil War, and he was a merchant. And then with a man named A.G. Lesh, they formed Toussey and Wiggins Pork and Beef Packers. So he didn't go into the family business with the banks.
Nope.
He went into beef and pork packing. And
at that time, believe it or not, there was a large amount of pork slaughterhouses.
Yes.
Here in Indiana, Indianapolis. It was downtown. They had several of them. Big business.
Yep. And you can see him in the paper a lot talking about the pork trade and the shares, and at the end of the year what the quarters were and how they marketed out and that sort of thing. His brother-in-law, James Nichols, was the banker. He worked at the bank with his father-in-law. The families were wealthy, well-connected, very social.
Yes.
However, in April of 1881, Woodford dies. So Eudora keeps the family in the home, but the Nickel family moves out, and the family of Charles Stewart moves in. Eventually, at the turn of the century, the building becomes apartments, and I wonder if this maybe had to do because in 1878, Wood actually filed for bankruptcy 2 years before he died.
Did he die in the house?
I can't find a record.
Don't feel bad. Also, just insert.
I couldn't.
Anybody knows where Gatlin lived while he was here? Please send us an email or a note on Facebook, because I could not find a house listed where he lived at. Polk directories, nothing, which is not my area. This is Jennifer's area. But, I was up one night, might have been drinking a little scotch, and thinking, this is funny. I wonder where this guy really did live. And so I got screwing around looking for it, and there is no place on file. It shows an address.
Well, let's go here and back to Richard Gatlin for just a second. Back in the Wikipedia that I searched earlier, let me search through to see if they've got...
I couldn't find
anything.
An address. A couple of things I want to bring out, too.
I don't see anything.
It's funny. The Gatling gun was discontinued from use in, I'm thinking, 1920s or something. I've seen it written down, but I don't know.
Because it went through the First World War, but not after that.
Not after that. So 1930-ish. Now, believe it or not, it's back. And people go, really? Well, not exactly in that
Yeah,
form.
not exactly
it's
that
called
form.
a minigun, if you've never seen one. I and Heather, having military experience, and especially Heather being an Army vet, I think the Army uses them. Or no, maybe they don't. No, I think the Navy probably is one of the heaviest uses of it.
The Army might have them, but I would not have experience.
Okay, just curious. Sea-Whiz, which is a giant Gatling gun, which is one of the most effective long-range and short-range weapons platforms. And then also you have the minigun. I think it became popular in the movie Predator. When they seen the guy take and just clean the forest with this thing, and it's still running at the end with those, and these things are real. I mean, I've got to fire one, and they're mounted on swick boats. They use them on a lot of different. The platform is fantastic, and so we went back. And they say all things, they say in fashion, all things eventually come back. Mm-hmm. Well, in guns it did, because I tell you what, in weaponry, this was one of John Gatling's original designs, and they modernized it, and it's lethal as every bit. It is. Yeah. It is nice.
Yeah, it really was the modern cursor for the automatic weapon. Once we figured out how to automize it versus the hand crank, it really happened. But there's nothing in the wiki about where Mr. Gatling lived. And to be quite honest, as soon as I found out the Gatling Gun Club building had nothing to do with him, I stopped my research on him and moved over to Wood.
I just got curious. I went through the Sanford maps for the Sanford Insurance Company, and I went through Polk. It doesn't list anything. Yeah. It lists the company. Now, he actually had some pork dealings, too. And it lists some company, but never lists a site where he lived. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just odd, Yeah.
And I actually stopped digging on him, but, maybe
if he lived in an apartment, and the Polk census wouldn't have hit that.
Right.
Because the Polk only lists what the address of the owner of the property is.
True.
So, I think that could be the reason why.
It could, and he wasn't here all that long.
No,
so,
he was not.
Most of his life was spent in St. Louis.
Yes.
But Wood, I couldn't find much either. Now, in the article I was reading, it talked about Wood being a very well-liked, very socialized man, and that his at the time of his death, he was listed as a gentleman and very well established. I couldn't find his obituary.
How about Towsey, the one that was with the National Bank, Indiana National? Oddly enough.
Oh, Nickel?
Yes, Nickel.
James Nickel. Couldn't find much about him. Once the property left Eudora's ownership.
Yes.
And that wasn't long afterwards either.
Is there a gap between it and the time that the...
No.
No, okay, just
And
wondered.
I thought there was going to be, because...
You knew where I was going, yeah.
Yes, because the way that it was playing out, I thought, okay, well, it went into apartments. How long did it last before apartments? And then the next thing I found was that in 1909, the Knights of Columbus buy the property.
Yeah.
So that was only 9 years after it was turned into apartments from Eudora. But Eudora doesn't die until the 1930s. So she sold it.
That's it, yeah.
And I guess...
Was she living there, though, I wonder?
I think she was living in the north side of the house like usual, while the back side was the apartments.
That makes sense.
That's my opinion, until the Knights of Columbus bought it in 1909. Yeah. Now, I could be wrong.
I think that makes sense.
I do have 3 kids, and I do work full-time, so I research when I can.
Oh, I know. You do a great job.
If I could
do
dive
a really good job.
deeper, I would dive deeper, but...
Well, we're all trying to figure out how to get a job chasing ghosts and get good pay. You can ask Jason Halls. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
No.
We do this for fun, and it is fun. I really have, and I end up down some rabbit holes, which is why I kind of get sidetracked sometimes.
I've had a lot of people ask me, they go, what are you doing at retirement? I go, what I love.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it truly was what I wanted to do.
Right.
Before we get to the Knights of Columbus, it's odd because I just wonder... it's split up in 2 apartments, obviously. It's never more than 2, I don't think, was it?
I don't know. I know that there are 2 houses.
They kind of allude to that, yes.
Yeah, there's 2 houses, and...
Is one of them across the street?
No. They're back to back.
Back to back,
So
okay.
they're attached on the back sides.
Okay.
So you have the south entrance and you have the north entrance.
Okay.
For the 2 families. So I think while Eudora was living in the north entrance with her family, she had rented out the south entrance.
Yeah.
Now, whether... she had rented the top level as one apartment, the bottom level as another apartment, or if they were broken up into 4, I could never find.
The reason I asked that is because, once it goes to Knights of Columbus. They make additions, but we'll get to that in a minute. But it had 2 separate staircases on the main floor. And I always thought this was very odd. And I'll never forget when I walked in, you've got one set going downstairs, and then 3 foot over, 4 foot over, you got another set going downstairs.
Then it could have been broken up into quads.
And that's what I'm wondering, because, the only problem is the only one that went upstairs was the north apartment. The south apartment had no upstairs access. But I'm wondering if they, that was just the smaller apartment of the two.
Possibly, or Eudora may have flipped
I asked
what side she was living on.
When I first joined, which was probably in the late 90s, I said, why is there 2 staircases? Guy looked at me, brother looked at me and says, it was a funeral home. I thought, okay.
Okay.
And, I'm sitting there going, what the hell does that have to do with it?
I bet all those staircases were from when it was switched into apartments.
That's, I think, that was when it was, originally designed as a duplex, so I think the wall went between them.
Yes.
And each side had its own staircase. So when they converted into one residence, they just took the wall out and it had 2 sets of stairs. And actually...
Well, I don't know that it ever went back into one residence from the time for at any point in time, because it was always...
Yeah, I misspoke.
One building for one purpose. The Knights of Columbus, they were actually going to tear it down when they purchased it in 1909.
God, everybody's always wanted to tear that damn building down. Someone actually did it, but I mean, oh my God, yeah.
Darn Americans, learn something from the Brits over in the UK. Keep something around for a little while.
Exactly.
For crying out loud. But yeah, they were going to tear it down. But they couldn't get the funding that they wanted. They wanted to build a 6-story grand structure on that site. But they couldn't get it, so they settled on a Greek revival porch, which is those massive columns that we see in the pictures. And then they put a 2-story auditorium on the backside.
Yes.
Okay. But they weren't very happy there. They didn't get to do what they wanted to do.
Sure.
So they sold it 10 years later in 1919. So they didn't stay there long. They moved on to another building, a historical building in downtown Indianapolis, and tore that building down.
Yeah. Well,
and built the one they wanted to build.
And I'm not, guys, I have a lot of Catholic friends. But Catholicism, they have certain ways they handle things. I, of course, never belonged to the Knights of Columbus, but I know guys that have been both Masons and Knights of Columbus. And there's a lot of similarities. A lot of people took a lot of what they learned from Freemasonry when they went to that direction. But, it seems to be a norm when Knights of Columbus go somewhere, they like it done their way, and they tend to tear it down and rebuild. But that's not unusual to other places either.
That's kind of normal, So the Gatling Gun Club purchased the building for the Knights of Columbus. The Gatling Gun Club roots date back to the 1890s. Mm-hmm. There was a professional drill team known as the Boys in Blue. And they would incorporate the Gatling gun in their national vaudeville circuit. So kind of what you're thinking of is modern-day drill teams with the rifles and the marching.
That was popular after
the drum corps. Yeah. So this group, though, the Boys in Blue, dissolved in 1910. Mm-hmm. Okay, so who bought the property in 1919 if they had dissolved in 1910? Okay. In 1910, the Boys in Blue were holding a program. And instead of filling the Gatling gun with blanks, they filled it with live cartridges filled with birdshot.
My understanding was one of the assistants got confused. It's awful hard to believe how the hell you get confused with because this is a 4570 Smith & Wesson cartridge, and they're loading powder. What we call powder blanks. If you're part of a reenactment group, when they go out, they have what they call flashbang powder loads, and what they are, the Civil War preloaded cartridges. A lot of people don't realize this. Without getting into turning this into a gun channel,
which I listened to for this program, by the way. To learn about the
welcome to our world. Yeah. Well, they used it looked like a little Tootsie Roll. It was actually wrapped at both ends.
Yeah.
And it would have your ball and your packing and everything. So all they had to do was just set this in the barrel, ram it, and then set the weapon. So
they would pre-pack those the night before?
Yeah, this is kind of like a... it was kind of like
it wasn't
the first
like in
run of a cartridge.
In the French, when I see the pouring the powder in, sticking the ball in, putting the padding in with a ramrod. That's what I pictured.
And that's the way the weapon was designed to actually fire. But we as Americans, and I learned this in the American auto industry, we can take any job as an American that takes 8 hours to do, and 2 hours later we found out how to do it 4 hours shorter and be able in the break room while reading a book. And so that's just our nature. But we found out that, hey, you can preload these. And actually... And I don't want to get this into a Gettysburg episode either, but when you're in Gettysburg, a lot of the ghosts are handy. I remember one of them handed a gentleman 3 preset cartridges, says you'll need these for tomorrow. Now, most of the time, if they were in a large battle and they were in embankments for whatever reason, they would load them with the powder horn. But if it came emergency and they were getting rushed and there was a charge on hand, they could reach in their pouch, drop one of these in, ramrod it real quick, and fire, and do it again. The only problem got to be the barrel got so hot after a while that paper they're wrapped in occasionally would catch fire and they'd misload. It'd blow their hand off while they're running a ramrod down in it. They had to be very careful. But it was actually preset. The one cartridges for the Gatling gun were actually steel cartridges. We got it by that far. And that's the same thing that happened here. These, I forgot the name. What was the name of the group? I seen that in a reading.
The Boys in Blue.
Boys in Blue. And,
yeah.
and you know, even if you have a props manager, you don't confuse live cartridges, because a live cartridge has a spread at the end that's curved. The powder cartridges looks the same, but they're definitely first of all, why would these guys have live ammo?
Why would you even have live ammo at a show?
And I'll tell you what.
Anyway.
Yeah, now I'll bring this up in the second half, because we actually have a Murat Gun Club that had guns that actually drilled. And the first thing we learned is at some point, and this was a story I was told, there was a mix-up, and I'm not getting into what was the Western that...
I was just thinking, let's not open that can of worms.
Yeah, don't want to get in there. They immediately plugged the end of the gun. Now, worst case scenario is if you fire a live round in a plugged gun, it blows the barrel.
Backfires.
Yeah, your shooter is at risk.
Right.
But the public is. And, good, bad, otherwise, I don't know. But anyway, it's very hard. The point I'm making is very hard to confuse cartridges. And why the hell would they have these cartridges in a drill team?
I know.
It's just really odd.
There were no accounts of casualties, just injuries.
Exactly.
So the drill team was done. But then William Law, who was a former drill team member and a Shriner, he formed a new team. So the Boys in Blue finally became the Gatling Gun Squad. Mm-hmm. They had 24-member rifle squad and a 35-member drum corps. And all those guys bought holding shares in a company, and the Gatling Gun Club was formed. Mm-hmm. And membership was then open to non-Shriners as well.
Yes, at that time.
So they're the ones who purchased the property in 1919.
Yep.
But by 2009, the average member of the group was over 70.
Yep.
And interest in such groups was dwindling, as you well know, Chief.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had to make the difficult decision to fold.
Yep.
And the building went into disuse.
Well,
so what happens next?
Well, I tell you, the story now, again, this is one of these things where we find out by research a lot of what we've been told is inaccurate and it's folklore. When I first joined Freemasonry, it was in the 90s. Several people I was associated with in the military have been Freemasons. I got in at that point, and it was a few years later I joined the Shrine. And the Shrine, for those that don't know, there's a lot of things you need to know if you're not a Shriner or a Mason listening to this. The Shrine is a club for Masons, okay? Because in Freemasonry, we don't drink. We treat it a lot like a church, although it is not a religious organization. And I'm not getting into that in this either. But the club is where guys can go relax, they can drink, and they're not getting any trouble because they're not on the Masonic temples. The thing is, we have a philanthropy that we support shrine hospitals. And at last count, there was 39 shrine hospitals. I'm sure someone will correct me, but that's the figure I have. And it's in 5 different countries, okay? And they treat children for numerous maladies, including burns and orthopedic and cleft palate. We're starting to get into cancer. We have some award-winning surgeons. I could sit here all day and tell you how great these hospitals are. But they take in children, and they don't charge a thing. Now, if they have insurance, we do ask that we were allowed to use it to curb our costs. But if they don't, we will transport the child. We will put up the parents. We will get the treatment for free. The children get what they need. So essentially, when I walked in, this place was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And, I became a Shriner, and I actually became a gun club member the same day. They would run you over to gun club, because every club was trying to get their cut of the fat. They needed the money, because when I joined in the late 90s, I was told that the average member was about 71 years old. And that was it, and they were trying to turn this around. Later on, I would be one of the members that formed Next Gen, the next generation of young Shriners. And eventually, by the 2000s, we got this number down, at least locally, to the average age of being about 51, which is still pretty high in some respects. But it did a lot of good work. When I joined the gun club, they ran me over to this building. It was kind of catty-corner behind the Grand Lodge, and, it was odd. Kind of reminded me of the Antelope Club. If you look at the Antelope Club, it's the same kind of building and the same design and everything. And what was the architectural design, the Italian influence?
Yeah, the Italianate.
Yeah, and the Italianate look, it all was the same. And I think one of the biggest things I learned there was, I had a brother tell me that, and they jokingly say in our organization that Freemasonry, we hand out pennies. There's a hidden meaning to that, and I can't tell you what it is. But anyway, you realize when you join the shrine, a Masonic penny is a $20 bill. And you're going to go through a few of them. And so, I joined 5 clubs, 2 of which I didn't even know I actually joined until later that evening. I got looking at all my paperwork. I got rushed that fast. But, it's kind of like a college rush party. And so I was taken over there, given a $2 beer, which I would not drink, and later was given something they said was wine. Kind of smelled like Lysol hospital disinfectant. But anyway, eventually I got a scotch, and I got a free card. My card is framed on the wall here in my office next to a patch. And but the gun club was a neat existence. The shrine, which, and I need to explain real quickly, Shrinedom works out of temples. So my temple is Murat, and people, if you listen to Clear Channel, is not pronounced Murat. We have no goddamn Murats at Murat. It's Murat. It's French, and it's not Murat. So, for all those that mispronounce, and those people on Fox 59 that couldn't get it right, it's Murat. So, and it's not Old National Temple, it's the Murat Temple. We don't even like Old National. Anyway, so having said that, and I'm sure I'm pissing somebody off.
There goes that sponsorship.
Yeah, there goes that sponsorship. Yeah. As the potentate says, oh God, who gave him a mic? And so anyway, bottom line is, they work out of a central temple. There's actually 3 of these in Indiana. And so we are the central part. But there was, at that time, there was separate buildings, okay? The Horse Club had a building up north, and they just recently got rid of it in the last 5 to 6 years. That's recent for me. And the building was operated. They had their own bar there. A lot of the clubs outside Marion County have their own. If you go to Johnson County in Franklin, there's a Johnson County Shrine Club there. There's one in Anderson. And they own their own buildings. So they operate as satellites, if you will. And then you have the specialty clubs like the Horse Club and the Gatling Gun Club. Now, when I was inducted in the Gatling Gun Club, first thing he told me is this used to be John Gatlin's home.
Richard Gatlin?
Richard Gatlin's home. And I'm going, wow, this is neat. And they had Gatling guns there. So you know what? It seemed reasonable.
It.
Yeah, it all seems to go in place. There's 2 on the front porch. There's 2 on the stage.
That's what I thought I was going to find.
Yeah,
right?
I thought, hell, this is John's home. Cool place. And so then you go a little further and go, oh, yeah, it was a mortuary at one time. The ramp in the back was there to bring in the bodies. They brought them downstairs and they prepared them. And the big freezer downstairs is where they kept the bodies at. I'm going, okay.
Yeah.
And then
I never found anything about a funeral home.
There's some funny things to that because now this goes out to Sam Thompson. Sam, wherever you at, brother, I love you. He was the monarch at the end before his death at the gun club. He was Mr. Gun Club. He ran the place, kept it. And you got to remember, because the fact that this was not a Masonic building to begin with, it was at some point, all the members were Masons. They said, hey, let's make it a new rule. We'll make this a Masonic organization, and we will shut down the ability for people that are non-Shriners to enter. Oh. And so at that point, and that's when you said, when they closed out, was it 1930s or 20s or something, it was still open to this. They closed that because all the members at that time were Masons. So they said, hey, no more. We're going to make it Shriners only. Not only do you have to be a Mason, because you have to be a Mason, to be a Shriner, you have to be a Mason. So, we're going to make this Shriner only. And so they locked it down. Well, Sam was kind of the last big monarch before his death. And Sam was a really good guy. And I'll tell you, the Shrine Club is full of hazement. But it's fun hazement. No one ever gets hurt. And there's going to be people, I'm sure, posting stuff going, oh, my God. No, they don't get hurt. And I tell you what, one of my best times I can remember, I came to the gun club one day to get a drink. And they had a wonderful bar there, and it was very inexpensive. Anybody that's in the American Legion, which I've been in the American Legion, and VFW, I think you were in the VFW. Yes. You can go there and get a cheap drink. Now, I walked in, and Sam Thompson, my good brother and friend, is sitting next to me in a dress, complete dress. Wasn't a bad-looking dress, if you were a woman. Wasn't bad-looking at all. Sam didn't really have the body for it. And I'll never forget, I looked at Sam, and I said, hey, Sam. He goes, what? I said, can I ask why you're wearing a dress? He says, you cannot, and mind your effing own business. And I go, okay. And I sat there a few minutes. I said, it's a good-looking dress. He goes, you want to find another seat? And I go, okay. And so a little later, I asked Blondie, the bartender, I said, why is Sam in a dress? She goes, he lost a bet. And I go, really? Yeah, she goes, yeah. I go, what was the bet? She goes, I'm not allowed to tell. I don't want to be fired. And so, but it was always a fun place. You always had something going on. The guys had a lot of, it was a great time to be alive. And the club offered a lot of things. They offered a place for some of the clubs to have arrangements because the Shrine Club, it was harder to get into to do certain things, although there was a lot of activities in the building. But most of the time, if there's activity in that building in the 90s, the potentate was sponsoring it. It was a sponsored event.
Okay.
If it was a club-sponsored event, it was cheaper to rent the gun club, and they go there because they cut them a deal, and it'd be cheaper. Yes, we did pay rent. It wasn't that kind of situation. But at the time when I joined, the only clubs actually belonged there was the Murat Gun Club. Again, that's pronounced Murat. Anyway, Murat Gun Club. And that was a separate unit. Now, the Gatling Gun Club was an incorporated unit, same as the Black Horse Patrol. They were incorporated separate from the Shrine. When you walked in, every light fixture had a Shrine emblem in it. They had Fez light fixtures. They were just taken down because they broke when I came in.
I saw that in the
those?
photo.
It's cool as hell. Guys were fighting over those to keep them at their house.
Oh, I bet.
And then the doorknobs had Shrine emblems in it. Now, when I came in, you come in the front door, and they had these beautiful backlit photographs, okay? And one of them was from 1940s, and that was 1920s of the gun club. Mm-hmm. They were 3 foot by 3 foot with fluorescent backlighting.
Oh, wow.
And you could see them. You walked in the door, and it teed right into those, and then you went left or right. Now, when I first got there, you always went right when you came in. Now, the north or the main entrance to what would have been the south apartment was the primary entrance we came in to the organization. The north entrance was pretty much shut off, was used for deliveries only. It was a very tight space, which most things downtown was. The things that I want to point out is the neat things about this real quickly. Again, this is not a history show. We'll get to where the ghosts are involved here shortly. Originally, as we talked about, it was a double. Okay, it had a beer garden in the back that was huge. Huge. The rest of the block was a beer garden. It was all fenced in. And when I say fenced, this was not chain link. This was brick wall fenced.
Okay.
And it had a double gate at the rear that they could open up and bring vehicles in. They could bring in whatever they wanted.
Kind of like what the Rathskeller is now.
Just like what the Rathskeller is. Yeah, it's very, very nice. And outside, it had an outdoor stage connected to the building. It had an outdoor bar below the stage where you could walk up and be served there. Inside, they had a beautiful bar that was custom designed out of, it's a Haydite block, not Haydite block, it's a security block, the large glass blocks. It was all down, so it was backlit on the bottom. This thing was beautiful. And it actually still exists. It was sold to the Sahara Grotto on Madison Avenue, and they now own the bar. Now, I don't think it's as long as it was, because I was in there and looked at it. It's been cut down a lot, but the original portion of the bar still exists. This was a beautiful bar. And so, anyway, enshrined them, bars are really important to us. It had a full kitchen. It had an inside stage.
Right.
And then, actually, we owned 2 of the original handmade by Richard Gatling guns.
Oh.
They were actually chambered in Colt, whatever I say it was, or 4570. And everybody goes, well, did Colt make it? No. Colt made which a lot of times a manufacturer of ammunition would make ammunition. If you buy, I usually carry an H&K that has a 40 SW. It's 40 Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson designed the caliber of ammunition to go in that weapon. So it's always, and you hear 45 ACP. Again, it depends on who designed that caliber. But they had 2 of the original Gatling guns. Now, you used to sit on the front porch back in the good days in the 40s and 50s where somebody wouldn't try to steal them. The problem was they kept trying to load them with fireworks and shit, and they had to take them off the front porch. So they actually hired a guy who was a woodworker to make 2 wooden duplicates. I swear to God to you, unless you really looked them over hard, you'd swear they were real metal Gatling guns. Wow. They looked metal. And they were hand done. They were functional. It would turn with a handle, and they were left in the original carriage, the 2-wheel, spoke-wheel carriages, on the front porch. And they were there until almost to the end, and they were beautiful. I used to go up and look at them and play around. Every guy would get drink and go out on the front porch and play with the guns. The ones on the stage you weren't allowed to play with, but none were ever loaded. They took the firing pins out, so they couldn't do anything if you did.
Right.
But, and those were locked in the office. And I never will forget the box. Had this ornate box that someone had made, and it said, Gatling gun firing pins do not give to anyone for any reason. And, I thought, somebody really had a good time with this box. But anyway, so it had a disco floor and had inside stage. When I say disco, it had dance floor. It was a disco ball. We had a jukebox, took no money. You go up and plug in whatever you wanted. It was great. It was there to the day that someone took it when he got ready to, because they gave a lot of it away when you started closing the place. Our door system was special. Our cards, and the card I have up here framed, has a magnetic strip in it. Long before the door systems of today that have tokens that let you in, we had one, and it was designed by the same person that put the security system in Eli Lilly's. They see all of our guys were Masons, so we took care of our own. So the same system went in the Eye Lilies. One of the first door security systems went into the gun club. So if you were somewhere else in town and got drunk, all you had to do was jump in a cab and you'd call for a Masonic cab. You'd hand them your card. The cabbie would take you back to there, open the door, and put you on the couch to sleep it off. And, so you didn't get in trouble. Now, there was rumor, and I want to be careful where we go with this broadcast.
I was going to say, let's not get in trouble.
Yeah, there was rumors that other agencies would take you there as well and would put you in there. So anyway, whether that was true or not was never found out. So not by me anyway. But it had one of the first door systems there ever was. And the problem was the guys would get drinking and put charge cards in there. You had to watch them. And so anyway.
Why is this working?
Yeah, I don't know. I've tried to charge it 3 times from my bar tab, and I can't get it through. It had a basement and the second floor. The second floor had meeting rooms, basement had meeting room. It did have a cooler in there. So a very large walk-in cooler. We were told where they took the bodies. Now, I was telling this earlier about the ramp.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sam looks at me and I go, so when was it a funeral home? He says, who told you that shit? And I go, well, brother such and such. He goes, oh, he's an effing idiot. He says,
oh,
he doesn't
Lord.
know. He says that ramp was put in by me 20 years ago so we could get the beer down there without a problem on a two-wheeler. He says, there's no bodies down there. He says, that refrigerator is put in 47. He says, it's never held a body unless one of the guys passed down in there.
It's a big refrigerator.
It's a huge reefer. They're called walk-in reefers. He said, that's where we keep the meat and everything at. And he says, damn thing goes out about once every 6 months. And he looked at me and he says, one of the guys from, the head of heating and air would come out and fix it. He says, you got to be careful what these people tell you. He says, some of them are idiots. And he just walked by me. I go, okay. Yeah. And, so that's my first introduction to how this worked. But anyway, it was very nicely done. It had and one thing that always fascinated me was the 2 staircases. Like I said, when somebody said, well, it was a funeral home, I thought, well, how does that work exactly? But anyway, one of them went to one. The sides were divided, though, and this makes perfectly good sense.
Right, because they're 2 houses.
Yeah, and they never, they never really had a women's bathroom. And I tell you, the reason why in Freemasonry is when guys get drinking, if you've ever been in a bar, you'll understand this. The men's room, sometimes they have terrible aim. And so they wanted the women's to have a cleaner restroom.
They don't always have to be drunk for that.
Exactly.
No. Yeah, and for those of us that just don't have a targeting system, so, the women's restroom was downstairs on the first run, and that's where they kept it really clean. The guys, there was 2 or 3 of them, and they would mop them out, and you find that all the restrooms were always tile. The reason why is they could always, and this was told me by Sam, you could always take the garden hose in there and spray it out at worst case scenario. Just take the toilet paper out. Anyway, so
Heather.
Yeah. So anyhow,
Men.
Yeah, I learned a lot of things in my days.
I have 3 boys.
Yeah. So and honestly, there was an interesting paper I couldn't find. It was written on the history of the Gatling Gun Club. It was published for a class paper on history by one of the children of a member, and was published on the 12th of April, 1957. The problem is, I don't know where the hell it was published at or which school. But I remember seeing it framed in there. Now, when you came in, they would have gaming tables on one side and then of the dance room floor. The bar was right as you come in the door. And then on the other side was a kitchen and more gaming tables. They kept the front open. A lot of things they did in here. Now, so we've covered all this. And the worst thing is that, in 2012, and actually it was about 2010, we knew that it was going to close.
Yeah.
There was too many building problems. Several times they'd shut us down for structural defects we could no longer fix. We didn't have the money.
And I could find a lot of articles around that time from the IBJ saying it was up for sale and people trying to buy it. And one lady had bought it, was going to try and turn it into a bed and breakfast or a boarding house or something.
Well, there was 3 different people back in
a bar, things like that.
Back in the 90s, we were foolish, and this happens a lot. Most all Masonic buildings, because of declining people.
Probably when you should have sold it.
Well, that's exactly it. I'm going through this with my lodge now. I belong to Prospect Lodge, and it's a great building. It's a beautiful building, but we didn't fix it when we had the money. We had tons of money, but we used it on something else. The building now is in desperate shape. We don't have enough members, enough money coming in for dues. Somewhere down the road, we're going to shut that building down and sell it. And it's sad because the buildings were beautiful. Now, people always ask me, well, why did you have these huge, huge buildings? And I'm going to quote a brother named Carson Smith, who one time on a tour of the Scottish Rite.
This is a good quote.
Yeah, he looked at one of the ladies and he says, "Do you know why all the buildings in Freemasonry are so grandiose and big?" And she says, "No, why?" He says, "It's to hold the egos of the men that are in them." So we're going to leave it at that. So anyway, but it was never really taken care of. So by 2011, Lee, who was the president, I was on the board with him, and I actually was there as the board to close the place. And so I'll never forget when the last day came that we needed to close and get stuff out. You could come in and take stuff. I have a patch, and I have several things. I have a glass from one of the ones when they used to have ID glasses that had pictures on it that said Gatling Gun Club. So, and I've got a Gatling gun ashtray somewhere. There was a bunch of stuff given to me. And everybody that wanted it could come down there and take whatever memorabilia. One of my buddies got the Gesco ball, and, that was his big thing. And so, but anyway, when it closed out, it was a very sad day for all of us because it had a lot of memories. Although toward the end, it was getting dirty and unmaintained, and I can see these same similarities in my lodge right
Prospect.
now. Yeah, it's going the same direction. So now we have to ask yourself, why is the gun club haunted, and why are we doing this history
Why
lesson?
exactly?
It's a damn good question.
Yeah.
I asked myself that back in 2009. In February of 2009, we were asked by Lee to come in and investigate the club. Okay, now again. Spirit's been around since, actually, we thought it up and started putting it together in 99. We actually went public in 02, so we've been around a while. And in 09, you got to remember, we'd only been around about 6-7 years at that point. And so we got this call, okay? I talked to Blondie, who was one of the last bartenders there, and there was, I cannot remember her name. I'll sit there and think about it. I think keep thinking Rachel, and that's not it. But the last two, because when she left, one of the bartenders had been there years before, came back. And they would tell me things that happened at night. They said, well, I hear funny sounds in the basement. And we've had things move in the basement. We've had things fall, doors open and close. We've heard doors opening and closing upstairs. We've heard, disembodied voices. We've seen out of the corner of our eye like shadow figures. Because at night, they would shut down these alcoves on the side of the dance floor where the poker tables were. If nobody was playing, they'd shut those down. And at the right side, as you were staying with your back to the bar looking at the stage, on the right side was where the ice machine was at. And funny story, I was just telling this before we got on air, past Grand Master, which was the Robert E. Hancock, illustrious Robert E. Hancock, 33rd degree. He was a past Grand Master and a past potentate. And I remember one night he called me and says, we're all getting together. We got a new ice machine at the gun club, and we're going to consecrate the ice machine. I'm going, really? And he goes, yeah, because we would look for things to drink for. Not that we could just drink.
I was just going to say the ice machine is very important to
that's
a
right,
fraternity
to a bar,
of drinkers.
Yeah. And so we spent an hour dedicating this ice machine. About 12 of us crammed in a room, 6 of us that didn't know why we were there to begin with, but we were all dedicating the ice machine. Even one of the guys from Prince Hall Order, we won't go into that, got roped into this mess. And we're all standing there with our drinks in hand, listening to these big speeches about the ice machine. I don't think any ice machine ever got better treatment in the world than this ice machine. But anyway, long story short, there was a lot of activity. Now, at the time, we thought it was a funeral home. We thought it was a John Gatlin's home. We didn't know why it had all these things attached to it. One of the first things that come to mind when you were doing the history, Jennifer, was it Woodard?
Yeah.
When it died, yeah. Did he die in the house? I wonder if he had. But we didn't really know. All we
I've
knew
got a
was
separate theory, but we'll talk about that at the end.
okay. Well,
I've
anyway,
been thinking here.
This has gone on since 09. So when we got brought in, we were still a pretty young group. Back then, a lot of the theories weren't around that are around now. We did a lot of things a little differently, but we came in, and we still, had the original methodology, which we adapted really from TAPS at the time. And so we came in. And the night we came in was a Saturday night, okay? Now, downtown Indy in 09 was fairly hopping in some areas. This was not one of them. Mm-hmm. This was an area where, the hopping part was some homeless person drifting down or a prostitute. You just didn't, it just wasn't a hopping area. Even then, there was areas of downtown that were good. This was not one of them. And so, by then, most things had wound down. We were close to the Grand Lodge building, close to the Scottish Rite Cathedral, but all that stuff kind of wound down by that time of night. We get there, and we begin our investigation, and we're setting up. This is before we actually begin the investigation itself. And we actually used the office, which is right as you come in the door, and we were setting up our command central there. And I had sent people several places in the building to do baselines for EMF and so forth. And I sent people to the basement, upstairs, and we heard this blood-curdling scream. I and Jim Hampton, our former tech manager, were sitting there, and we heard this blood-curdling scream. And I thought, what in the hell? And I looked at him, and I, because we're thinking someone's being molested on the street or something like that. And he says, oh, my God. So he steps out, looks out the front door, and goes, I don't see anything. Comes back in, so we kind of blew it off.
So it came from outside?
Well, we're not sure where it came from. It sounded like it was in the damn room with us,
because I would have thought maybe one of the team members had fallen or something.
Well, and, we didn't have radios back then. Yeah. And so, at that time, a few minutes later, Ed comes up. He was down in the basement and said, did you hear that woman scream? And I said, yeah, I heard it. He says, I swear to God, it was in the same room as it was Mike. And I looked at Jim about the same time. I said, dude, that's the same thing we had up here. It sounded like it was in the very same room. He said, well, I'm telling you, it sounded like it was right behind me.
Wow.
And I'm going, well, that's kind of, about that time, Dave and his wife, Kim, came down from upstairs, and they said, or from the back of the building, they said, did you hear that woman scream? And I'm going, yeah. I go, the damn thing, we didn't have the recorders on or anything because we were setting up.
Right.
And I said, tell me how you heard it. And they said, well, we were in the back by the stage, and we were up on the stage by the back door, and we kind of thought it was somebody in the beer garden. So we ran around to one of the two side doors because there was doors on either side of the stage emptied in the beer garden. And I said, we looked, there's nobody out there. And so the last person to come up, I think, was Wade Yentzel. And he came from the basement and said, hey, did you hear that gal scream? And I'm looking at him, I go, okay, listen to me, guys. So here's what we're going to do. We're all going to go outside and surround the property. I said, because there's an alley that was on the back side. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I said, three of you, we're going to travel in parachute. We know what we're dealing with here. Go to the alley. I said, and so I divide everybody. Somebody to the south side, somebody to the north side. We split off. We came back, and there was nothing nowhere. There wasn't a car on the road. I think maybe one or two cars came down, if that many. I mean, it was quiet. There was no one even, and Ray goes, I can see in the Scottish Rite parking lot, there's no one over there. There's nothing. The building's quiet. And we usually had a police patrol would come through there at night occasionally, would sit in the lot. They weren't even there. There was nothing. We looked all around. And so we came back together and said, okay, let's hypothesize here. How would this have happened? And Ed says, well, maybe somebody drove by and she screamed out the window. Okay, that's a valid point.
Possibility.
It's a valid point. But the odd thing was, no matter where anybody was at in the building,
it
we heard
sounded
it like it was behind us.
That is freaky.
That is so freaky. And so at that point, we said, okay, new rule. Every investigation from this point on, and we've done this.
We start a recorder right away.
From the time we set up, we start a recorder, and we say, hey, this is the baseline Command Central recorder, and we're starting this recorder.
Yep.
We do that because we don't want to take a chance on missing something.
Right.
And I'm gut feeling is that this gal screamed and knew we were there and immediately started that. Now, the investigation, it was not a really bad evening. It was actually in the fall. It was great temperature because it wasn't overly hot in there. And we caught numerous things. We caught a couple of shadow figures that, that really weren't on film. And they didn't, of course, they never were where we put the cameras when we starting out, and still to this day will elude us. We got some neat EVPs. I was going back over the EVPs last couple of nights on the file, and we got some great EVPs. And we got some of male voice, female voice. We had things move. We had a couple of doors that opened. We had one door. The two doors going out to the beer garden from the side of the stage were heavy glass commercial store doors. And they had steel bars in them to keep them from being open. We heard the door open and slam shut, and we went and looked, and there was nothing there.
Maybe we should drop those in the recording here, so
I tell you what, if I can, I have to go back through. The bad thing is, for some reason, back then we did not. I don't know why in this particular investigation we didn't section those out.
Right.
But now I don't know. We got those on audio, but we did get a lot of the EVPs. I'm gonna see if I can find some EVPs, and if I can, I will insert them at this point. Okay, so anyway, if I find them, we'll put them in. I do have two audio files. I know they're there because I did listen to them, but I'll be honest with you, it was a neat night. We caught a lot of different things, a lot of high EMF levels in certain areas, especially the basement. And, of course, we attributed that to being a mortuary. So it's, hey, that's where they prepared the bodies, And, I'll never forget Sam Thompson saying the only bodies were prepared down there was 2 or 3 drunks we had to haul up the stairs. And, I mean, he says that's why another reason I wanted that damn ramp. But anyway, it always was a standing joke. But nobody really knows for sure who or what. Now, later on, I do some research, and I find out that there is a tunnel system being put in underneath Illinois Street. It's part of the Dig Indiana, which is a sewer operation. Now, it was done during the I think it's early to mid 2000s, and they dug through. But you know what? As I was digging, and this is another episode, I found out we had an electric train or subway system at one time under Indiana. I did not know that. I've never heard of this. Yeah, that's at least
Under
what I
Indiana?
found. Now, I haven't had, in Indianapolis. I have not got a chance to go. I know there's tunnels, and there was tunnels, of course, underneath the old hotel, and it was where the city market is now.
Yeah, the catacombs.
Yeah, the catacombs, which really aren't haunted. I mean,
don't
they're just
think so.
catacombs,
Yeah.
and there's no basis for it. But there's also
Just
some other
because
tunnels.
it's dark and spooky and creepy doesn't mean it's...
Yeah, there's a tunnel
haunted.
that still exists, and it's a drainage tunnel. It goes from the east side, southeast side to northeast side. When I say south, it's not really south, but it's on Emerson. There's a park there now. I was trying to remember the name of it, but you can get in it, and it goes, because originally Indianapolis had a canal that ran all the way through it. The canal that's there now. It was bigger and larger, and this actually went to the canal and then opened on the other side and went to the northwest side of Indianapolis.
Okay.
And this tunnel system still exists. It's full of homeless. They don't want it played a lot, so you don't hear a lot
Yeah.
about it. I was trying to think of the name of the park. But anyway, it's over here by Emerson and Emerson 21st Street. There's a park there, City Park. And it has these tunnels that run through it. Hang on a minute. Let me see if I can...
That's
You want
not
to look on...
Is that a Garfield area?
No. This
No.
is toward the interstate. You want to look for it? Heather's going to look and see if we can find the name real quick.
Okay.
Because you see it from the interstate. And the park is there. They got a boat up. It's up and elevated. And... Yeah, I know it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't think what it is. But anyway, it actually has tunnels. But there's tunnels in lots of places. There's tunnels under several
Because
schools.
we used to live over there.
Yeah, we used to live over there. We lived in the hood, and where we lived at, they had this tunnel I found about just oddly enough. But honestly, there's several tunnels.
Oh, is it that park that you can see straight from I-70 as you're
see
going up
straight
to
from
70?
I-70, and you see it from
Yeah.
Parts of Emerson, and
Right.
Okay. That's it. It's
All right.
from
I know what you're talking
I-70.
about.
It has a
Okay.
boat that's up on, and actually when it
Yeah.
floods the right amount, the boat doesn't ever float away, but it's there. They have this real weird anti-foliage system in the drainage tube where it has these blocks. It was actually, it starts with a T, I think. I can't remember the name of it, but anyway. But turns out there's a lot of damn catacombs in Indianapolis that ran underneath. Not only sewer catacombs, but actual catacombs. One thing I learned when I talked to Nicole Dabrowski, who is the author of the book on the Central State, there was catacombs went to every building. And, that was used to transport patients during
Right.
climate weather or when they didn't want the public to see. And so, that was not unusual. Downtown had it. Now, I know for a fact, and a lot of people are going to go, oh, my God, no. Murat Temple actually has property that goes underneath New Jersey Street. There's
Right.
actually buildings or rooms underneath there. There's a lot of that. And I think that was not uncommon. The Scottish Rite, as they expand and actually the parking lot, several times we've had sinkholes develop. One of which in the north parking lot, they found a safe that was in the bottom of it, and it had been a basement for a double basement, which was 2 floors down underground, and it had the original safe from the company. It was too heavy to move, so when they left, they just left the safe.
Oh, my.
And the parking lot started caving in, and we found this basement that was never filled in. So it does happen down there.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if it's something from that. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this place could be haunted.
Well, the funny thing that I was thinking, doing the research, is like, I don't know what Chief's going to tell me because I don't know anything about the investigation because I wasn't part of the group then.
Yes.
But I was at a get-together, we'll call it.
Okay.
And we were talking about a location and its spirit activity. And one of the women there asked, well, did they die here? Is that why, was it a gruesome death? Are they trapped here because of that? And
Well, that's the go-to. Most people think if you have a ghost, it's
Right.
because someone died there.
And we was like, no, nobody died here. It's just, well, how is it haunted? You don't have to have deaths on the property. All you have to have is energy, whether it be good energy,
And
bad
some
energy.
connection for some reason.
And like with your
Yeah.
lodge,
Yeah.
places that have emotional connections can have attachments.
Mhm.
If you spend a lot of time somewhere or you have a really good time
Yeah.
as an important part of your life, who's to say you can't go back there to enjoy it again?
Sure.
So if the guys there are a fraternal organization, that's where they have their community time.
Yeah.
That's where they're going to go back in depth.
One of
right?
the best lines ever, and I'm going to credit this to Father Murphy if he's listening. Tim Murphy, past potentate, Amira Shrine. he's told me one day, he says, the Scottish Rite's full of ghosts. He's always been kind of a sensitive. I said, really? He says, yeah. I go, how do you figure? He says, well, why not? He said, these guys sure as hell don't want to go home to their wife in death. They had to go home in the living. He says, so they come here and hang out. He walked away, and somehow or another, those things just suddenly in your mind go, that makes halfway sense.
It really kind of does make sense.
Yeah, it does.
You guys had parties there, gatherings there, get-togethers.
Those guys that, the Scottish Rite.
Relaxation time.
Dale Wheatley, the building manager, he loves that building. It's a part of him.
Right.
And, it'll be a part of him when he dies.
Right.
I think if he goes anywhere, he'll come back there. People loved that building. Tom Fallis, the executive secretary, he's painted it. He's done some of the restoration work. These guys had a reason to come back.
Right.
The one at my lodge, that was the one I was always told that, he lived there. He constantly worked on the building. So it makes sense. They have an attachment. Mm-hmm. So what is your theory?
Well, that's my theory.
That's your theory? Okay.
Is that I don't necessarily think that it's Eudora or Woodruff or anything like that. I think it's just the camaraderie, the laughter,
Brothers over the century.
the
Makes sense.
And maybe for some of them, the sadness.
Yeah. It could be.
Maybe the sadness, maybe there was something lacking.
Well, maybe I'm just sentimental, but I look at the buildings that are going away now. We sold the Horse Club.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, I've only been there one time. It was way up on the north side. It's gone now.
Yeah.
There was an after hours party place that I was never involved with that was downtown that they also owned. I think it was called the Jacobite Club. I have to look and see. But the Hottie Club or something, they stayed there and they would go from the shrine when it closed over there.
Right.
That's back in the days of, the true parties. I mean, those days have long since left us. I mean, a lot of the group, even the younger guys, we have things to do. People look at social events differently. A lot of things are online,
yeah, it's
electronic.
a totally different world now than it was
is.
50 years ago.
And I'll tell you, I miss
different.
those days. I see, where a lot of people are coming from. So the attachment's there. It could be.
I mean, I was just going to say that's the same reason why I think cemeteries are haunted.
Yes.
Most people think, why would cemeteries be haunted? Nobody's dying there. The spirit is long gone before it gets to the cemetery. But think, that is where families congregate to commune and,
in the Hispanic
and give
community,
respect to their loved
big
ones.
Thing. They take dinner and they go out and have dinner, especially
so
on
if I knew that my family
Muertos.
was all going to one place to come talk to me, I'm going to go there to talk to them.
Well, the idea is De los Muertos, they go and they bring food and they sit around with their relatives. And I mean, it's big. So
yeah, I mean, we used to have picnics in our family plot cemetery visiting my dad.
Oh, yeah.
We would take our fried chicken and root beer out.
Well, cemeteries used to have down Kentucky anyway, because when I would go down to my relations, we would go to certain ones. They'd have shelter halves that they actually had built with picnic tables.
Oh no, that's neat.
Yeah, and they would do a family reunion there at the cemetery.
Yeah,
and people walk around, look at the different graves, and there were several cemeteries that had that. And these are out in the sticks. I mean, they're way out, but there would be one member of the family would maintain that, and each member would, when they arrived, they would give them $10 or $15, and that would go toward the maintenance. But they mowed it and everything, took care of it, and that was a big thing. And I think that maybe that's what this is.
I think
it's
maybe
like
that's what this
cemetery.
is.
And guys are maintaining it, and they're the next generation.
Yeah.
Couple quick things before we wrap up. The Gatling guns that I told you about, they were actually donated to a museum, the Rupke Armor Museum in Crawfordsville. And for whatever reason, they put them up for auction. And they were auctioned off. They are actually worth between $80,000 and $148,000. They sold for over $140,000. They're in a private collection now. The wooden ones were given to the State Museum, which is downtown off Pennsylvania Street, and it was given to them. So the wooden reproductions were given to them. And so that was... it was actually finally officially closed out in 2012. I have pictures of the excavator tearing it down. It was originally bought by an individual, like you said. It was going to make it into a lot of things.
Yeah.
That even talked about a nightclub. And at one point, 6 of us got together. Luke Stark, if you're listening, he was one of them. And we talked about making this a nightclub. And originally... that was a good idea, and then a nightclub opened further up on the other side of the road that actually took our idea. But it was not, the building would cost so much to get it back to where it needed to be.
Yeah, that's what that lady
just to make it safe.
Out.
Yeah, and so she sold it to a religious group, which I don't have the name. That group turned around, decided that they got it, and then they couldn't do anything with it, and they kind of got be the end customer. And the city gave them a choice. You either get it in line and fixed up where it's safe, or we're going to condemn it and tear it down.
Right.
So they went ahead and tore it down. I've
Yeah.
got pictures. Jim Hampton walked over and took pictures the day they tore it down for me, and he took them and sent them to me. So I have those
Yeah.
photographs, and they'll appear later. So that is forthcoming. So
I have the name of that park.
Yay.
yes, go ahead.
It's Pogue's Run.
Pogues Run.
Pogues Run.
Pogues Run was the original drainage system, actually, that went from the, so to speak, from the east side to the west side.
Actually, it's an actual creek.
It is. That runs through there.
Yeah.
But it's
Cool.
actually was preserved, and it runs all the way through. You can go in it. Several of the urban explorers have went in it. You'll find this on YouTube.
It's one of our natural wetlands.
Wetlands. Yeah, exactly.
So Pogues Creek, yeah. And
That's what it looks like as you drive
but there
by
is
it,
more.
too.
There is more
Well-
underground, and maybe that, of course, if we can find any
Indiana
underground
has
haunted.
very
that,
few wetlands
Oh,
left.
God, yeah.
Very
and this
few.
is one of them.
Yeah.
Unless
I
we
think
have a lot
Dobbin
of-
Speck is another one up by where I live.
Emerson
Flat Rock
Avenue
has some.
floods if you're in the right spot.
Yeah.
That's not a
Well,
wetland anyway.
no.
But yeah. Anyway,
We have to
yeah.
stop
That's
carrying
natural.
them down. Leave them
But
alone.
Flat Rock has
I'm
one.
sure everybody's
Yeah.
really curious about the underground tunnels. I am too. Unless we can find one haunted, it won't be on an episode. But
No.
hey, if not, I'm sure somebody's exploring one.
Right.
Take a look on YouTube. Take a look on somewhere and see if you can, online and see if you can find
Underground
that. So-
tunnels don't have to have a bad reputation,
No.
but
No.
most
They
of them
can.
do.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, in
lot of 'em
Vegas,
do.
a lot of them do. I remember they did a special on Vegas.
Or
We're not going
Chicago.
into that. Oh, Chicago has them too. No kidding.
Holy cow, Chicago, the
No kidding.
mafia land? Yes.
Oh, okay.
There's
okay,
tunnels
okay.
everywhere.
Well, we always said that, and this is in future episodes coming up, the Volrath and some of those had tunnels that went to other places. Because
Yeah.
these are places where Dillinger, not so much, Dillinger was a lot of people call him a down home or hillbilly kind of outlaw. He really didn't operate in the same level as Al Capone and some of them did, because they made arrangements wherever they went. They had tunnels to escape.
Yeah.
Now, Dillinger was smart. Please don't think I'm insulting
No.
because I'm not.
no. Yeah.
But he was kind of that vigilante Robin Hood kind of character. Al Capone was slick. He knew what
I don't
to
know
do.
about Robin Hood.
Well, yeah, that's probably getting him
I
credit
don't know
going the
about-
wrong direction,
I
I
think he
guess.
liked to keep that money, but he
Yeah.
liked to promote that good boy,
he
bad
did have,
boy
he
image.
did have the one policy that when he was in a bank, he wouldn't rob any of the people's money that was standing there.
Correct.
He only took the banks.
Yes.
And it was always kind of funny about that. The best one, I think, though, the one that I really like is where he's posing with all the sheriffs at the jail the night before he breaks
That's
out.
where he breaks out.
That's got to say something. You got to have a little style, and I mean that
Yeah.
style. So,
Yep.
all right. Well, folks, that's all we have tonight. If you want to go on our Facebook page, if you want to ask any questions about Gatling Gun Club, I'll try to answer them.
Or any other questions.
Or any other
Yep.
questions you have. If you got some stories or something we want to hear, hey, post them. That's the conclusion of tonight's episode, Ghost to Ghost. We hope you enjoyed this. This episode was written by myself and Jennifer Verne. It's now time for our Ghost Story of the Day with Jennifer Verne.
Today's ghost story of the day is actually from the Indiana Weekly Messenger, Indiana, Pennsylvania. Front page news report from December 19, 1900. Thoreau's mother's ghost. Besides Thoreau and his mother, the house at Concord has had for its occupants A. Bronson Alcott and family, including his distinguished daughter Louisa M., the author, writes Samuel S. Kindon in the Ladies' Home Journal. To them sometimes came the ghost of Madame Thoreau. Those who know Madame Thoreau and her habits confirm the description given by a servant, who left the house because of the visitation. In every detail, her tall, gaunt figure, her big white cap, her stealthy step, her quiet comings, and her noiseless goings. When seen, she invariably stood in the doorway, her great cap well adjusted, her neat handkerchief, half unfolded, tucked securely into the waistband of her full dress skirt, pausing a moment on the threshold, looking anxiously about, then stooping and running her finger along the edge of the mop-board, to see if perchance a speck of dust had found lodgment there. Proceeding to the workroom, she glanced in, then glided to the fireplace, stooping over it and motioning with her hands as if in the act of covering the coals with ashes. In life, it should be said, the two prominent characteristics of Madame Thoreau were an abhorrence of dust and a dread of fire. Satisfied on these points, the spirit would disappear. Unlike other ghosts, this one always appeared in the daytime.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.